as the second anniversary of the highly contentious abrogation of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which granted Jammu and Kashmir a special status, approaches on August 5th, there are some early signs that normal politics may be returning to the state. A meeting of what is known as the People's Alliance for Gupkar Declaration on Wednesday suggested that a measure of normal politics may be underway. Leaders of the alliance, a grouping of major political parties including the National Conference, the People's Democratic Party, and the Communist Party of India Marxist, met at the residence of former Chief Minister Mehbooba Mufti. Since the abrogation of the article, the Kashmir Valley in particular has been in the grip of deep political fractiousness, arrests and long detentions of top political leaders, frequent lockdowns, and severely restricted access to telecommunications. To get a broader perspective on the state of affairs in Jammu and Kashmir, Mayank Chaya Report spoke to Zafar Chaudhry, a well-known Srinagar-based journalist, policy analyst, and writer. How do you assess the People's Alliance for Gupkar Declaration's latest assertion over Article 370 and bifurcation of the state? They are saying they are going to continue to be focused on it. What is your assessment?
So basically what happened that when 2 years ago, precisely on the August of 5, 2019, all these political leaders of Jammu and Kashmir, they were taken completely by surprise. So they were not prepared of a political development, of a constitutional change of this scale. So they hurriedly put together this Gupkar alliance. But I think in our South Asian culture of politics, more than ideology, it's also the power that matters, that whether you are to be able to come back to power or not. So there are internal contradictions. All these parties, they stand for restoration of the Article 370 or the pre-August 5, 2019 constitutional position of Jammu and Kashmir, but they have no method, so they have no strategy, and they have no plan, no program for that to be able to achieve that. So they had taken off with 6 parties, which came together between August and October last year. So 2 parties have already fallen out. The 2 other parties, they do not have any proper cadre or any structure on the ground. So it's basically about 2 parties, and they have to be the rivals, the electoral rivals in the Kashmir Valley in all cases.
So by which you mean the National Conference and
National
PDP?
Conference and the People's Democratic Party. You see, National Conference is a historical political party of Jammu and Kashmir that came into being in late 1930s. So this party had a footprint across Jammu and Kashmir, across the regions, across the communities. But that has significantly shrunk. So National Conference is also now limited to Kashmir Valley only, where it finds People's Democratic Party as its core competitor. So tomorrow, day after, 6 months later, a year later, or 2 years later, at some point in time, all these parties will have to come back to the electoral politics and fight for to be able to come back to power. And that's where the PDP, the People's Democratic Party, and the National Conference, they find themselves, locked in a competition about which they are not able to talk. But at the same time, the ideological agenda that they have before them about the constitutional position of Jammu and Kashmir, they don't have any method, any strategy for that to achieve.
Right. You mentioned that we are coming up on the second anniversary of the abrogation of Article 370 on August 5th. In what way has the absence of those special privileges under that article changed life on the ground for the ordinary Kashmiris?
Well, if you ask me to, respond to this question very honestly and in all practical ways, so it hasn't changed much because there wasn't much left in the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. The Article 370 did not promise a lot of autonomy to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. It was just, a psychological sense of satisfaction that we have a special power, we have our legislature, and we can make our own laws. We have a constitution of our own, and we are different from other states. We are different from rest of the country. Now that has gone in a certain way that that was very sudden, that was very surprising. People were not prepared for that. Now the change, the practical change, which I am sure is not going to be permanent forever, that is that the quality of democracy as the Constitution of India promises in a federal structure to all states, to all people, that they will have an access in the decision making process through legislature, through political executive. Now that is absent in Jammu and Kashmir for not for last 2 years, but for last 3 years since this month, since June 2018, when the last government fell down.
Right.
So that is it, that people don't have access to the decision making process. So here is the government, and then there are people. The government is saying that we are doing pretty much for people, and people say that we don't have access to the government. So it's a psychological thing also, that and it's a quality of democracy that stands challenged, that stands neutralized in a certain way.
You mentioned again that both the PDP and the National Conference, the leaderships were surprised by the abrogation. I find it strange for the simple reason that the BJP, for perhaps decades, had been harping on that very subject. As far as I know, the right wing politicians across the world,
Yeah.
when they say something, they'll do it. You, I think, better believe that they'll do it. So I find it strange that neither Dr. Abdullah nor the PDP leadership of Mehbooba Mufti expected that to happen.
That's very important, very important question. And you know what happened, that on the August 5, 2019, when people were caught in a very difficult situation, that how to react on this whole development, I did a 27-minute long my video blog, and I
I
remember
remember
having
that.
talked about that. The BJP's foundation is laid on the premise of abrogating Article 370, like
There
in
you
its
go.
previous avatar, the Bharatiya Jansangh. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, the founder of Bharatiya Jansangh, he breached a particular law that was in vogue at that time, that people from rest of the country will have to obtain a permit to enter the state of Jammu and Kashmir, because the state had a special status. He challenged that. He came to Jammu and Kashmir, and he died in a prison in Srinagar.
Right.
With such a background, and the expansion of party election after election, going to every state in the country and telling people that you vote us to power, we will abrogate the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. With such a history behind its promise, it's completely naive to expect that you did not know that such a thing could happen at some point in time.
Right.
So they were in a sort of illusion that, look, this is a very sensitive matter. Kashmir's case has always been, from where you are sitting at the moment, or from anywhere in the world, or anywhere in India, we have grown up hearing that Kashmir is a very sensitive issue. You cannot cross the red lines. You cannot go into the area where people don't want you to go. So everyone thought that this is not going to happen. This is a mere jumla. This is
Right.
just an electoral slogan. But yes, BJP was completely committed to that, and they did that.
I want you to focus a little bit. I'm digressing from the immediate theme here, but
Sure.
like I mentioned, from 1989 to 1997, I
Hmm.
visited Kashmir practically 7 times a year as part
Yeah.
of my beat
Oh,
for
great.
India Abroad and IENS.
Right.
Uh, I'm very familiar with what was going on then on the ground. It's been a long
Uh-huh.
time that I've returned to it. Would you mind telling me, as someone who lives there, who lives that life, what is going through the minds of ordinary Kashmiris beyond just the political jockeying?
I think this is a very significant question to ask, which not many people are focusing. So statistics and numbers are not something which can explain a political situation somewhere. The period you are mentioning between 1989 and 1997 was a time when militancy was at its peak. A
Right,
small district like of the size of Srinagar, 300 square kilometers or something, would have 15 to 18,000 militants. You would have massacres every now and then, almost every week, in which 20 persons are dying, 25 persons are dying. So that was the kind of, the violence was at that scale. That is something that has drastically come down. That has drastically come down. Now you have just a few hundred people dying in a year in the militancy related incidents. So, I mean, at the surface, one can say that the situation has become very peaceful. But I think that the political conflict has become very micro and it has become very personal over a period of years. So you do not have an agency of voice. You do not have political parties, people trusting political parties, or parties trusting each other. You don't have even people trusting each other. That trust has broken
Right.
down at different levels, at different layers. Now you have a case of siblings. Within the family, someone has died fighting for the Indian state as a cop, and someone, his brother, he has died fighting as a militant for a different cause. Within the political parties, you have siblings. One is with the pro-India mainstream political party, another is pursuing the separatist cause. So I
Right.
think there is this moral, cultural, political degeneration that has happened at every level, at every scale. And the more, unfortunate situation is that people who are caught in this situation, they're not aware of what they're going through.
Right.
So because everyone wants some change to happen, everyone wants the status quo to be changed, but no one trusts the other person who is sitting beside him and is also talking about the same thing. So
Right.
I mean, in that context, I think it's a very different situation from any other place with this history anywhere else in the world, because it has become very micro and very personal, the perspectives and people's desires and their engagement, the effect of conflict on them. So this is how the society looks like at the moment.
Now, I'm glad you are mentioning the micro part of it. I don't, people have no concept of what it means to be in this
Yeah,
state of mind all
yeah,
the time. I mean, think about this. You are essentially a post traumatic disorder all the time for the last three
yeah,
decades or so. Is there
yeah.
anyone in the valley? I'm talking about non political leadership, people who have some understanding of psychology, psychiatry, looking at what it does to entire generations of people. Is there anyone who is even seriously thinking about this problem?
Uh, Unfortunately, I know that on this question I'm going to be challenged and being asked by people that on what basis you said no. But unfortunately, I don't find anyone. I mean, standing up and working in that direction, because this is also one of the fallouts of conflict, that people don't trust you. I mean,
Right,
even if the best of thinking, the best of approach, you have to analyze situation and work with people to bring down the tension, to bring some relief to people, then people will still keep on looking at you as someone who's pursuing A's or B's or C's agenda. So and this is something, this breakdown we have seen at the political level as well, because people don't trust the political leadership. So beyond
right,
politics, it's really very difficult, because you can't build that kind of network in a society that has gone through a conflict.
right,
So
right.
that is another serious challenge, that in such a situation, when there is no good, honest, clear and transparent communication, trustworthy communication between the people and the government, then who do you look up to in this situation to help you come out?
Right, right. No, which is deeply worrisome because even if you solve the problem politically, you have such profound divisions at individual micro levels
Yeah,
that will take perhaps decades to get back to normal.
certainly, certainly. Just to say something at this point,
Yeah,
I think uh, people need to gather courage to look at the society, to look at themselves beyond Article 370, beyond special status, and beyond all these political contours. People should engage in honest conversation with each other.
right,
Sometimes there is a group think that everyone thinks that something has gone completely wrong, but there are a number of things which are pretty beautiful, which are pretty great.
right,
So probably people can come together. People have not lost their land. People
right,
have not lost their culture. I mean, you know that in the India-Pakistan partition, where if you look at the case of Punjab or you look at the case of Bengal, people lost everything. They lost the sense of belonging to a particular land, but then still they were able to rebuild not only their lives but also the culture around them. So in
right.
that sense, Kashmiris have not lost anything. There is a lot
True.
that Kashmiris can rebuild upon. So
Right.
I don't know. I mean, that can be a conversation that can start at individual level. Why do you look
Yeah.
up for the major leaders to help you have that conversation between
Right.
yourselves?
Right. This is a perfect segue for me to ask you about the much talked about return of the Kashmiri Pundits. Uh,
Yeah.
because Kashmiriyat, as they call it, I mean, you live
That's right.
Kashmir.
Yeah,
Kashmiriyat has always been about harmonious living for a long time.
yeah.
In that context, do you think there has been such a staggering failure to get the Pandits back, even under the BJP dispensation, which was always tom-tomming its love for the Kashmiri Pandits and hasn't done much at all?
You see, this Kashmiriyat was at one point a very pious, not only word, but also a way of life, and
Right.
which now stands completely maligned because everyone is using Kashmiriyat according to his own political perspective, and that does not really define the Kashmiriyat as it existed as a composite culture of Kashmir, where Hindus and Muslims were different from rest of the world and they were same together.
Right.
This question of getting the Kashmiri Pandits, the original inhabitants of Kashmir Valley, back to their homes, is basically it's. This is also something that we have to understand going beyond politics. That this has a lot of practical difficulties. While as the Muslims who live in Kashmir, they are very much eager to have the Kashmiri Pandits back. The Kashmiri Pandits love to go back and get settled in Kashmir, but then no one is taking up that first step to build that trust and get people back. I
Right.
see I know a number of stories, I know person to person, individual stories, one to one stories, where people, they're in love with each other like anything. But if you look at the community level, there are still a lot of problems. There are still I'm afraid that I would have to say that that fear that prevails among the Kashmiri Pandits. Not very long ago, I think in the last 1 week to 10 days, a member of the Kashmiri Pandit community, who is also a member of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, and he was elected to a village town council in south of Kashmir. While he
In
was on
Tra,
tour of his place,
you're
he was
referring to
gunned down.
Right? Rakesh Pandita.
Rakesh Pandita. So once one Rakesh Pandita is killed, that reverses the process at least by a couple of years. So
Right.
for another 2 years, I mean, it's very difficult for the community to be able to think that we can be in a position to go back. And there are hundreds and thousands of Kashmiri Muslims also who
Right.
understand that once this Rakesh Pandita has been killed, I mean, it's practically difficult for them to open their arms and welcome Kashmiri Pandit that please come back, because Kashmiri Muslims have also died by thousands, and
Right.
that number is really very large. If they have not been able to protect themselves, what kind of guarantee they are in a position to be able to offer to the? So it's practically very difficult situation, and I'm not sure. I mean, it's very unfortunate. It's very
Right.
unfortunate. This is something that pains my heart. That I'm not sure that whether this is practically going to possible at some point or not.
I see. Once again, you're very familiar with the depth of philosophical thinking in Kashmir for
Yeah,
centuries.
yeah.
Why is it that there is no serious pushback against this politics of violence, which has been there for 30 years? I would have thought that given Kashmir's depth of philosophical thinking, there would be a serious cultural movement rising against it.
I think the culture of philosophical thinking in Kashmir has, over the last 3 decades, been taken over by a culture of radical thinking. So we have to understand that that is the dynamic shift in the society, which people regret that they should not have happened. And the second thing is that why people are not allowed to take recourse to their philosophical thinking, that the Kashmir's thinking is entirely about peace. It's about brotherhood.
Right.
Violence was never a culture of Kashmir. The politics that has thrived over this situation over last 30 years has entirely operated in a separatist environment. And the separatist environment is that to keep on talking about violence, that violence becomes your key tool of negotiating a political power. So that ultimately, what happens, that catches up the whole society in a web, and it becomes very difficult for them to be able to come out of that. I am one of among those persons. While I deeply feel about the absence of legislature and political executive, because I am a very democrat person at heart, I always believe that there should be a thriving democracy everywhere. People should have
Right.
access to the decision making process. But then I'm someone who have been saying since August 2019 that in some way, in a drastic way, maybe in a negative way, there is a sort of clean slate before us,
Right.
because this has been a monumental shakeup, And this shake-up, this provides some sort of opportunity to do a fresh thinking about our lives, about our culture, about our politics, about our thinking. So here is that opportunity. But I think at some level, people are thinking and people are talking about that, and some kind of discourse, some kind of narrative is building around that as well. That that for how long the violence can be accepted as a normal, and has the time come for an ordinary person to come out and say that, look, there is absolutely no to violence, and this is not something we want that to happen in Kashmir, from whichever side that bullet is coming from.
Right. And final, just the last couple of things. One is in terms of now that there was a meeting the other day at Mehbooba Mufti's residence. Do you think political movement or politicking, as it were, is returning to the valley after nearly 2 years in a serious way?
Sorry, there was a disruption in the audio. Can you please say that again?
Sure, sure. The meeting at Mehbooba Mufti's residence, do you think that signals the return of normal politics after 2 years or so?
In a certain way, yes. You see what happened, that they came together there last evening, and they said that we have that there were the two issues that have brought us together. One is that it's been a very long while that we did not have an opportunity to meet, so we
Right.
wanted to catch up and check on each other, that how is everyone doing. And second is that we wanted to reiterate that our stand on the special status of Jammu and Kashmir remains unchanged, and we are willing to engage with the center and everyone else who matters to in our this pursuit of getting the special status in Jammu and Kashmir restored. But there is something that has happened. There is something in its background that has to be seen. There are some recent developments about the process of delimitation of the legislative constituencies in Jammu and Kashmir. When this change of August 5, 2019 happened, the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act that created the Union Territory and the bifurcation and the downgrade of the state to the Union Territory, that also included one provision that next election shall be held only after a process of delimitation. So that
Right.
delimitation process is currently going on. The National Conference, the only regional party which has representation in the parliament, and the members of parliament have to be the members of the delimitation commission. They had initially boycotted the delimitation commission's proceedings by saying something very significant. They said that delimitation commission is an outcome of the August 2019 developments, and anything that is an outcome of the August 2019 development is illegitimate and not acceptable to us.
I
But
see.
over the yeah, right. So this is the background. But over the past few weeks, they have been contemplating, they have been talking, they have been doing conferences with their political cadre to explore the possibilities, that is it a good idea to go back on our this statement and join the delimitation commission.
I
I think
see.
in that backdrop, the other partner in the Gupkar alliance, Mehbooba Mufti, thought to check with the national conference that what are you up to. If you are going to join the delimitation process, which means that you are keen to contest the elections, if those are to happen even within union territory at some point in time, then what are you thinking about us?
Right.
So this really signals a significant step towards normalizing the August 5, 2019, while no political leader will accept this thing that now this. But if you look at the chronology, as our Home Minister Amit Shah famously said, if you look at the chronology, so the chronology suggests that they are in a certain way normalizing, accepting, and showing some kind of willingness to participate in the processes which are direct outcome of the August 5
Right.
events.
Right. And finally, before I let you go, much has been said about how the abrogation of 370 would lead to major demographic rearranging of the valley by having lots of non-Kashmiris come in. First of all, are there any signs of that, and do you think that can really happen?
Well, there are opportunities. Now, there are legal routes that if people from some other parts of the country want to come,
Mhm.
want to settle down, buy lands, do businesses, they can. But how far practical people would be interested in coming and settling down in Kashmir Valley is an entirely different matter. So, I mean, there are assessments that 1.5 to 2 million people. There is a possibility that if they want to come and settle down, there are different categories in the domicile process. They
Right.
can come and settle down. But then we have to look back at one thing. If for the convenience of your audience back there in
Right.
United States, the erstwhile Jammu and Kashmir, the undivided one, as it existed since 1947. I'm not going back to the state that existed between 1846 to 1947. I'm
Right.
talking about the state that existed after 1947 as a part of the Indian Union, was comprised of the three important geographical, cultural, and political entities, and which were also organized as the administrative units. So one is Kashmir Valley, one is Jammu, which is more contiguous with the Indian mainland, that touches and
Right.
borders with Punjab and Himachal Pradesh. Kashmir Valley, Jammu, and Ladakh. Now, Ladakh stands as a separate union territory. Its case is not anymore with Jammu and Kashmir. Now, there are two divisions, Kashmir Valley and Jammu. Kashmir Valley is one such place on the face of earth where not many people over last 200 years have come to settle down.
Right.
So the Dogras of Jammu, who actually made Kashmir Valley part of the Jammu and Kashmir state, who ruled the state for 101 years, even they did not settle down or build large, businesses or something in Kashmir. They have houses which they eventually abandoned, or the subsequent state,
Right.
as it took shape in 1947, took over. But Dogras generally they did not. My point is that people from the Jammu, even people from Jammu division, did not go to settle down in Kashmir Valley. It's very less likely for anyone
Okay.
from other parts of the country to come and settle down in Kashmir Valley. So, I mean, those fears are overrated. While
Okay.
as I'm saying
Yeah.
that there is a legal route, I mean, legally, people can come and settle down. So the citizenship has been defined in a different way now. It's no more a domain of the state government here. So every Indian citizen can come and settle down. But if and at all some people are interested to do some businesses, that will entirely be, mostly be in Jammu province and very less likely in Kashmir Valley. So
Fine.
it's close to 2 years now. Not more than 200,000 people, other than the existing state subjects, have taken the domicile certificate. And most of them were those people basically who already lived in Jammu and Kashmir, but they did not have the local citizenship papers. Now they have been entitled to take those papers in. So it's overrated in a certain
See,
way.
that's a very significant point you're making because that was one of the paranoias about the abrogation of
Yeah,
370. I mean,
yeah,
it's not my case that it may still not happen. It can happen 5 years down the line, but
it can.
as of now, it hasn't happened.
Yeah, it hasn't happened in a particular. There is another thing. So why would people come? So the primary interest for people to come is to take jobs in the government, because Jammu and Kashmir is known for a very very high scale of jobs in the government sector. So this is a very small state with
True.
the 12 million population, but then you have at least 1 million people in one or the other ways employed by the government. That is one of the highest proportions anywhere in the country. So that is one lucrative idea
Right.
to come and settle down in Jammu and Kashmir. But laws have already been made that all jobs in Jammu and Kashmir are entirely reserved for the domiciles of Jammu and Kashmir,
I
and
see.
no one from any other state can come and stake claims to the jobs in Jammu and Kashmir.